My name is Sheriff Raymond Hatch, and for 27 years I served as the law in Mineral County, Nevada. Before you watch this, I need you to understand something very clearly. If you're planning a road trip through Nevada, if you're one of those urban explorers who searches for abandoned places, if you think ghost towns are just empty buildings and good photo opportunities, then what I'm about to tell you might save your life. Or, at the very least, it might save you from becoming something else entirely. Before continuing, if you subscribe and like the video, you will be contributing greatly to the continuation of new stories to come. And I'm curious, where in the world are you watching from right now? Drop your location in the comments. Have you ever been to Nevada? Have you ever felt the weight of the desert silence pressing down on you like it has substance, like it has intention? There's a place about 60 miles southeast of Hawthorne, off what used to be State Route 361 before they rerouted it in 1987. The old road still exists, mostly swallowed by sage and alkali dust, but you can follow it if you know where to look. It leads to a town that doesn't appear on any modern maps, a town that the state of Nevada officially lists as never having existed, despite the fact that I can show you census records from 1887, incorporation papers from 1889, and over 200 death certificates filed between 1890 and 1952. We call it Silence, though that wasn't its original name. The miners who founded it in 1886 called it Silver Thread for the vein they discovered running through the hills. But by 1891, everyone who lived there called it Silence. The records don't explain why they changed the name. After what happened on September 15th, 2024, after what I found in that town and what I've become because of it, I understand perfectly why they chose that word. I've been a sheriff for nearly 3 decades. I've investigated murders, suicides, missing persons cases that stretched across state lines. I've worked search and rescue operations in 120-degree heat and blizzards that drop 2 feet of snow overnight. I've seen the absolute worst that humans can do to each other, and I've seen the desert kill people in ways both swift and agonizingly slow. I thought I understood the nature of death. I thought I understood the difference between a body and a person, between presence and absence. I was wrong about all of it. What I learned in silence, what I became in silence, has taught me that death is not an ending, but a threshold, and some thresholds were never meant to be crossed by the living. Yet I crossed it anyway. Or perhaps it's more accurate to say I was pulled across, and now I exist in a state that has no proper name in any language I know. September 15th, 2024, started like any other early autumn day in Mineral County. The sky was that particular shade of blue you only get in the high desert, so deep and clear it almost hurts to look at. Temperature was already pushing 85 by 9 a.m., heading toward the mid-90s by afternoon. I was in my office in Hawthorne, working through paperwork, when I got a call from Sarah Chen, one of our deputies. She'd been patrolling the back roads south of town, checking on some of the more remote properties where we'd had reports of copper wire theft from abandoned mines. Sarah was good people, thorough and unflappable, which is why what she told me that morning got my attention immediately. She'd found a car, she said, a 2023 Toyota Camry with California plates, parked at the end of the old Route 361 spur road. The car was locked. Registration showed it was a rental from Las Vegas, and there was no one around. The concerning part was the gear in the back seat. Professional camera equipment, a drone, laptop, several cases of water, freeze-dried camping food, and a hand-drawn map showing the route to Silence. I told Sarah to stay with the vehicle and headed out immediately. It's a 40-minute drive from Hawthorne to where that old spur road branches off, and I spent the entire drive thinking about the last time someone had gone looking for Silence. That was in 2019. 3 college students from San Francisco doing a documentary project on Nevada ghost towns. We found their car in almost exactly the same spot. We never found them. The search lasted 2 weeks, involved helicopters and tracking dogs and volunteers from 3 counties. We covered a 50-square-mile area. Nothing. No bodies, no equipment, no trace beyond their vehicle and their campsite. The official report listed them as lost in the desert, presumed dead from exposure or accident. I signed that report. I believed it at the time. The desert is vast and unforgiving, and it keeps its secrets. But I remember standing at their campsite on the 5th day of the search, standing there in the pre-dawn darkness, and feeling something watching us. Not someone. Something. A presence that made the hair on my arm stand up, that made my breath catch in my chest. I dismissed it as exhaustion and stress. Now I know better. When I reached Sarah's location, I found her standing by the Camry, looking uncomfortable in a way I'd never seen from her before. Sarah had served 2 tours in Afghanistan before joining our department. She didn't rattle easily, but she was rattled now. Before I could say anything, she pointed at the map on the dashboard. It wasn't just a hand-drawn route to Silence. It was annotated in meticulous detail. GPS coordinates, elevation markers, landmarks described with precision, notes in the margins about sight lines and camera angles. And at the bottom, in red ink, someone had written, "They're still there, all of them, waiting." I asked Sarah if she'd tried to follow the trail, and she shook her head. She'd walked maybe 100 yards up the old road, she said, and then she'd stopped. Why? She struggled to explain it. It wasn't that she'd seen or heard anything specific. It was more that she'd become aware of something, some quality to the silence that felt wrong. The desert is quiet, sure, but it's not silent. There's always something. Wind moving through sage, ravens calling, the distant sound of a plane or highway. But up that road, she said, there was nothing. No sound at all. Not even the sound of her own footsteps. She'd taken 3 more steps, heard absolutely nothing, and turned around. I looked at the map again. The annotations were recent, the ink fresh. According to the rental agreement in the glove box, the car had been checked out 3 days ago to a Dr. Marcus Webb, age 34, from Berkeley, California. I ran his name through our system, while Sarah called the rental company for contact information. Dr. Webb was a professor of anthropology at UC Berkeley, specializing in Western American ghost towns and mining history. He had no criminal record, no outstanding warrants, no history of mental illness. He'd published 2 books and numerous academic papers. He'd done extensive research on Nevada's abandoned mining towns. And according to the notes on his laptop, which we eventually accessed with a warrant, he'd spent the last 6 years investigating Silence specifically. He believed the town hadn't been abandoned in the conventional sense. He believed something had happened there, something that explained why the state had gone to such lengths to erase it from official records, why the name appeared in documents up until 1952, and then vanished completely, as if someone had gone through every archive and removed every reference they could find. I made the decision to go in immediately. In missing persons cases, the first 48 hours are critical. If Dr. Webb was injured or lost somewhere between the road and silence, every minute mattered. I called for backup, 2 more deputies, and our volunteer search and rescue coordinator, and we geared up properly. Radio equipment, GPS units, water, first aid, everything by the book. I'd learned long ago to respect the desert. It doesn't forgive carelessness. Sarah volunteered to stay with the vehicles and maintain radio contact. We established check-in protocols every 30 minutes without fail. If we missed 2 check-ins, she was to call for additional resources. Then we started walking. The old road was still visible, 2 parallel tracks worn into the alkali soil by decades of wagon wheels and later by tires. Sage and rabbit brush had reclaimed most of it, but you could follow the route easily enough. The morning was beautiful in that stark way the high desert can be, the light sharp and clear, the sky enormous overhead, and it was quiet, very quiet, but not yet silent. We'd been walking for maybe 20 minutes, covering about a mile, when I noticed the first marker. It was a cairn, a stack of rocks about 3 feet high, positioned on a small rise to the east of the road. Nothing unusual about that. Travelers and miners had been stacking cairns for navigation since the 1800s. But there was something off about this one. The rocks were too precisely placed, each one perfectly balanced, and they were all the same type of stone, a dark basalt that didn't match the local geology. I walked over to examine it, and that's when I saw the symbol carved into the top rock. It wasn't anything I recognized from Native American petroglyphs, though it had that same ancient quality. It looked like a circle with lines radiating inward rather than outward, as if it were depicting something collapsing or converging. And underneath it, someone had carved numbers, 1891. Deputy Martinez, who'd been with our department for 15 years and grew up on the nearby Walker River Paiute Reservation, came over to look. He stared at that symbol for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then he said something in his native language that I didn't understand. When I asked him what it meant, he hesitated. Then he said it translated roughly to the place where sound goes to die. His grandfather had told him stories about silence, he said. Stories that the elders didn't share with outsiders. Stories about why the Paiute had avoided that area for generations, long before any white miners arrived. I asked him what the stories said, and Martinez looked uncomfortable. He finally said that according to the oral traditions, there had been something in those hills, something old that lived in the spaces between. Between what? I asked. Between moments, he said. Between heartbeats. Between sounds. It existed in the gaps, in the pauses, and if you listened too carefully to the silence, you might fall into those gaps yourself. The Paiute had known to avoid that place, to speak constantly and loudly if they had to pass through, to never stop moving and never stay after sunset. Then the miners came, he said. The miners who didn't know the stories and didn't listen to warnings. The miners who thought silence was just the absence of noise. They learned differently. They all learned differently. I asked him if he wanted to turn back, and he shook his head. Dr. Webb was out here somewhere, he said. We had a job to do, but we should be careful. We should talk to each other, keep making noise. Don't let the silence settle. I thought he was being superstitious, but I was also starting to feel something strange myself, a pressure in the air that had nothing to do with barometric readings or altitude. We continued up the road, and I made sure to maintain conversation with the team, checking in by radio with Sarah every 30 minutes like clockwork. The landscape didn't change much. Sage and rock and alkali flats stretching in every direction, the mountains rising dark and jagged to the west. But I started noticing more cairns, all of them identical to the first, all marking the route at irregular intervals. And I started noticing something else. The sound of our footsteps was getting quieter. At first, I thought it was just the composition of the ground, maybe softer dirt absorbing the impact. But then I realized it wasn't just our footsteps. Everything was getting quieter. The wind that had been rustling the sage, the distant sound of a jet high overhead, the creak of our gear, even our breathing. It was all fading, becoming muffled, as if someone were slowly turning down the volume on reality itself. Deputy Martinez noticed it too. He started talking more, telling stories about his kids, asking questions, anything to keep sound in the air. The other deputy, a younger guy named Crawford, made a joke about selective hearing and his wife. But I could hear the edge in his voice. We all felt it. The silence pressing in. At the 2-hour mark, we crested a rise and saw silence for the first time. It sat in a shallow bowl of land between two lines of hills, maybe 40 buildings still standing, their wood weathered silver gray by a century of sun and wind. From this distance, it looked like any other Nevada ghost town, empty and slowly returning to the earth. But even from half a mile away, I could feel that something was wrong with it. The light didn't fall on it correctly. The shadows were too dark, too sharp, pointing in directions that didn't match the sun's position. And the silence was now absolute. I couldn't hear anything. Not the wind, not my own heartbeat, not even the sound of my own thoughts, if that makes any sense. It was as if the air itself had become something other than air, some substance that absorbed sound so completely that even the possibility of noise ceased to exist. We stood there for several minutes, nobody speaking, because speaking seemed suddenly impossible. And then Crawford broke. He started making noise, any noise, clapping his hands together, stomping his feet, shouting. The sounds were there. I could see him making them, but they were distant and muted, like hearing something underwater or through thick glass. I tried to use the radio to check in with Sarah, our 2:30 check-in, but there was nothing. No static, no carrier tone, just silence. I checked my watch. 2:33 p.m. Exactly. I tried the radio again. Still nothing. Martinez was trying his radio too, with the same results. We had a problem. Our communication was gone, and we were standing on a ridgeline, looking down at a town that felt wrong in ways I couldn't articulate. The professional thing to do would have been to turn back immediately, return to the vehicles, call for additional resources with proper communication equipment. But Dr. Webb was down there somewhere. I could feel it. And those 3 college students from 2019, I thought I knew now where they'd gone. They'd come here, they'd found silence, and they'd stayed. I made the decision to proceed, but to stay together, no one splitting off, no one going into any building alone. We'd do a quick sweep, look for signs of Dr. Webb, and if we didn't find anything in 30 minutes, we'd abort and reassess. It seemed reasonable at the time. Looking back, I understand that the moment I made that decision, the moment we started down the slope toward silence, we were already lost. We'd already crossed a threshold that couldn't be uncrossed. The walk down into the town took maybe 10 minutes, but it felt longer. Distance seemed unreliable here, stretching and compressing in ways that made my depth perception useless. Buildings that looked close stayed distant. Rocks that seemed far away were suddenly at my feet. And the silence grew heavier with every step, becoming not just an absence, but a presence, something that pressed against my skull and filled my lungs. When we reached the first building, what had been a general store based on the faded paint on the false front, I stopped and looked back the way we'd come. The ridge where we'd stood was clearly visible, maybe 200 yards behind us. But I couldn't see our footprints in the dust. The trail we'd made coming down had vanished completely, as if we'd never walked that path at all. I pointed this out to Martinez and Crawford. They looked at where our tracks should have been and said nothing. What could they say? We turned our attention to the town. Silence was remarkably well preserved for a settlement abandoned in 1952. The buildings were weathered but structurally sound, their windows mostly intact, their doors still hanging straight. There was no graffiti, no signs of vandalism or salvage operations. The town looked less abandoned than paused, as if everyone had simply stopped what they were doing and walked away, intending to return but never managing it. We walked down what had been the main street, a wide dirt road lined with buildings on both sides. There was the general store, a saloon, a blacksmith shop, several smaller structures that might have been residences or offices, and at the far end, a larger building that looked like it had been a hotel. Everything was coated in dust, but not as much dust as there should have been after 72 years. And there were objects, everyday objects, sitting where they'd been left. A shovel leaning against a wall, a bucket by a well, a chair on a porch, all positioned as if someone might come back any moment and pick up where they'd left off. Crawford spotted something and pointed. On the porch of the general store, barely visible in the shadow, was a backpack. Modern, bright blue, definitely out of place. We approached carefully. It was Dr. Webb's backpack. His name was written on the identification tag, along with his Berkeley address. Inside, we found his wallet, his car keys, his phone. The phone was dead, battery completely drained, but the last photo in his camera roll showed him standing in front of this exact building at sunset. The timestamp said September 12th, 7:42 p.m., 3 days ago. He'd been here 3 days, and his gear was sitting on this porch, and there was no sign of him anywhere. I looked at Martinez. He was staring not at the backpack, but at the door of the general store, which stood slightly ajar. Through the gap, I could see darkness, absolute darkness that seemed somehow thicker than mere absence of light. Martinez said we shouldn't go in there. He said it quietly, his voice barely audible even in the complete silence. And I realized that was wrong. There was no sound at all. I shouldn't have been able to hear him speak. But I had. Or I'd understood him without hearing. The distinction seemed important, but I couldn't grasp why. I pushed the door open slowly. It swung inward without sound, and I stepped into the general store of Silence, Nevada. The interior was dark, but my eyes adjusted quickly. Shelves still lined the walls, and some of them still held items. Canned goods, their labels faded and illegible. Bolts of cloth, rotted by time. Tools hanging from hooks. A counter that ran along one side with an old mechanical cash register, its drawer slightly open. And behind the counter, standing perfectly still, was Dr. Marcus Webb. He was facing away from us, looking at something on the wall behind the counter. He didn't turn when we entered. He didn't acknowledge our presence in any way. I called out to him, my voice strange in my own ears, and he remained motionless. Crawford started to move forward, but Martinez grabbed his arm, stopping him. There was something wrong with Dr. Webb's stance, Martinez said. People don't stand like that. The way his weight was distributed, the angle of his spine, the position of his arms, it wasn't natural. It wasn't possible. I looked closer and realized Martinez was right. Dr. Webb was standing at an angle that should have made him fall over, his center of gravity all wrong, his body oriented to a direction that didn't exist in three-dimensional space. I called out again, louder, and this time Dr. Webb moved. But he didn't turn around. Instead, he tilted, rotated, as if he were on a pivot point that wasn't located in his body. He moved in a way that hurt to watch, in a way that made my eyes water and my stomach clench. And when he completed the rotation, when he was facing us, I saw that he wasn't Dr. Marcus Webb anymore. Or he was, but he was also something else. His face was his face, his features recognizable from his driver's license photo, but there were too many of them. Not duplicate faces, nothing that obvious. More like his face existed in multiple states simultaneously, overlapping, occupying the same space but from different angles, different moments. I could see him as he'd been when he arrived in Silence 3 days ago. I could see him as he'd been this morning. I could see him as he would be tomorrow, next week, next year, all at once, all layered over each other like a photograph taken with a camera shaking. And his eyes were the worst part. They weren't looking at us. They were looking through us, past us, at something beyond our position in space and time. He spoke. At least, I think he spoke. His mouth moved, and meaning entered my mind. But there was no sound, no words in any language I knew. What I understood was this: time isn't a line. Time is a web, and silence sits at the center of that web, where all the threads converge. Every moment that has ever happened in this place is still happening. Every moment that will happen is already here. The town wasn't abandoned. The people who lived here didn't leave. They transcended. They learned to exist in all moments simultaneously, to spread their consciousness across the web rather than being trapped in the single thread of linear experience. They became something more than human, something vast and distributed. And anyone who comes to silence, anyone who stays long enough, anyone who listens to the true silence, begins to transcend as well. It's not death. It's not disappearing. It's expansion. It's becoming part of something infinite. And Dr. Webb, Marcus Webb, who'd come here searching for answers about a ghost town, had found those answers. He'd found them and accepted them. He'd let go of linear time, let go of sequential existence, and now he existed in every moment of silence simultaneously. Past, present, future, all at once. He was still standing at the counter. He was also walking through the town 3 days ago. He was also dying of thirst somewhere in the desert. He was also old, gray-haired, still in silence decades from now. All of it true. All of it happening. All of it him. Crawford started screaming. The sound was strange, distorted, as if it were coming from multiple points in time at once. Young Crawford and old Crawford and dying Crawford all screaming together. Martinez grabbed him and pulled him toward the door, and I followed, backing away from Dr. Webb, from the thing that wore his shape and infinite other shapes. We stumbled out onto the porch, into the sunlight that seemed too bright and too dark simultaneously, and Crawford kept screaming until Martinez slapped him hard. The impact was silent, but effective. Crawford stopped, gasping, and we stood there, trying to process what we'd just seen. I looked at my watch. The hands were moving, but not smoothly. They jerked and stuttered, jumping forward and backward, as if time itself couldn't decide which direction to flow. I looked at Martinez's watch, and it showed a different time entirely. Crawford's showed yet another. None of them matched. Time was broken here. Or more accurately, time had never been what we thought it was. And here in silence, the illusion couldn't be maintained. I knew we needed to leave immediately. We'd found Dr. Webb, or what he'd become. And there was nothing we could do for him. Nothing we should do for him, maybe. He'd seemed content in his infinite expansion, if content was even the right word. But I also knew we needed to understand what had happened here, what was still happening, because if we didn't, more people would come. More urban explorers, more researchers, more curious souls who thought ghost towns were safe destinations. They'd find silence, and they'd transcend. And the town would grow not in space, but in time, spreading its influence across more and more moments. I made a decision that I've questioned every day since. I decided we needed to search more of the town, to look for records or evidence that would help us understand and document this phenomenon. Martinez immediately disagreed. He said we should leave now, right now, and never come back. He said his grandfather's warnings were right, and we'd already stayed too long. But Crawford, who'd stopped screaming and seemed to have regained some composure, backed my decision. He said we had a duty to investigate, to gather information that might prevent future tragedies. 2 against 1. Democracy in action. We proceeded deeper into silence. The buildings we explored were all similar to the general store, perfectly preserved, filled with objects and furniture positioned as if waiting for their owner's return. And in several of them, we found people, or what had been people. A woman in the saloon, standing behind the bar with a bottle in her hand, her form overlapping with multiple versions of herself from different decades. She wore a dress from the 1890s, and also jeans from the 1970s, and also nothing at all, as if we were seeing her across every moment she'd ever spent in that room. A man in the blacksmith shop, hammer raised to strike an anvil, the hammer coming down and rising and falling and striking simultaneously, the ring of metal on metal that never was and always had been. 2 children in what might have been a schoolhouse, sitting at desks, their faces young and old and infant and ancient all at once, learning lessons that spanned centuries. They didn't react to our presence. They existed in their own temporal spaces, their own infinite moments, and we were just passing through, tourists in someone else's eternity. We found records in what had been the town's assay office, ledgers and journals, filing cabinets full of documents dating from 1886 to 1952 and beyond. Some of the entries were dated in the 1960s, the 1980s, even the 2000s, written in different hands, but all describing the same phenomenon. Silence had discovered something in 1891. The records weren't entirely clear on what triggered it, but it seemed to involve the mine. The Silver Thread Mine had been producing well for 5 years, and then in the summer of 1891, the miners broke through into a chamber that shouldn't have existed. Not a natural cave, not another mine shaft. A space, the record said, that existed outside of sequential time. A pocket where past and future overlapped, where all moments were accessible simultaneously, and something lived in that space, or existed in it, or was it? The records called it the silence, capital S, as if it were a name rather than a description. The silence that exists between moments, between sounds, between thoughts. It wasn't hostile, the records insisted. It wasn't trying to harm anyone. It was simply there, and proximity to it changed people, changed their perception, changed their existence, made them aware of the web of time rather than just their single thread within it. The town of Silver Thread had faced a choice. They could seal the mine, abandon the discovery, return to their linear existence, or they could accept transcendence. The records show that debate lasted for months. Town meetings, arguments, families divided on the question of whether to stay or leave. And gradually, those who chose to stay began to change. They began to exist in multiple moments. They began to spread across time. And they discovered it wasn't frightening. It was beautiful. To exist in all your moments at once, to be young and old and newborn and dying simultaneously, to see the entirety of your existence as a single eternal present, was to understand something fundamental about the nature of consciousness. Death became meaningless because you always existed in the moments before it. Birth became meaningless because you always existed in the moments after it. Everything was simultaneous. Everything was eternal. They renamed the town Silence because that's what it took to perceive this truth. You had to stop making noise. You had to stop distracting yourself with sound and sequential thought. You had to listen to the gaps between moments. And in those gaps, you could fall through into eternity. I was reading these records by flashlight in the assay office, Crawford looking over my shoulder and Martinez watching the door, when I became aware that my perception was changing. I'd been in silence for hours now, long enough for the effect to begin. I could see my hand holding the journal, but I could also see it turning pages I hadn't turned yet, words I hadn't read yet, understanding I hadn't gained yet. I could see myself standing in this room yesterday, tomorrow, next year. I could see the moment I decided to become a sheriff, decades ago, and I could see my death, years in the future, and all of it was happening now, all at once. Time isn't a line. Time is a web, and I was caught in it, spreading across it, becoming it. I looked at Crawford and saw that he was experiencing the same thing. His face showed fear and wonder simultaneously, the emotions from different points in his timeline overlapping. And I understood that we couldn't leave. Not really. Oh, our bodies might walk out of silence, might return to our vehicles, might drive back to Hawthorne. But part of us would stay here, existing in this moment forever, reading these records forever, understanding this truth forever. We were already transcending. The process had already begun. Martinez was shouting something, pulling at my arm, dragging me toward the door. He was the only one not affected yet, maybe because of his heritage, maybe because his people had known for generations how to protect themselves from the silence. He was speaking in his native language, a continuous stream of words, keeping sound in the air, anchoring himself to sequential time through the act of speech. He pulled me and Crawford out of the assay office into the street, and I saw that the sun had moved. Or rather, it existed in multiple positions simultaneously. Morning sun, and afternoon sun, and evening sun, all sharing the same sky, casting shadows in impossible directions. The town of Silence glowed with overlapping light, beautiful and terrible, every moment of every day happening at once. And we stood in the street, 3 men who'd come to find a missing person, and I understood that the concept of missing was meaningless here. No one was ever missing. Everyone who'd ever come to silence was still here, existing in all their moments, eternal and infinite. Martinez got us moving. I don't remember the walk out of town, not as a linear sequence of events. I remember it as a simultaneous experience, every step at once, every moment of that journey, happening in a single, eternal present. We climbed the ridge. We were always climbing the ridge. We had already climbed the ridge years ago. We would climb it again tomorrow. All true, all simultaneous. And when we reached the top and looked back, silence was there and also not there, visible and invisible, existing and not existing, depending on which moment we were perceiving from. Martinez kept talking the entire time, his voice the only thing anchoring us to linear perception. He told stories from his childhood, recited prayers in Paiute, described his breakfast that morning, anything and everything to maintain the illusion of sequential time, to keep us from spreading too far across the web. We reached the vehicles as the sun was setting, or rising, or at zenith. Time had become unreliable for me by then. Sarah was there, frantic with worry because we'd missed 4 check-in times and had been gone for over 7 hours. 7 hours that I'd experienced as 7 hours and also 7 minutes and also 7 years. She took one look at our faces and called for medical evacuation immediately. We were transported to the hospital in Reno, all 3 of us, and spent 2 days undergoing tests that showed nothing wrong with us physically. But the doctors couldn't explain why our perception of time remained unstable, why we could describe events that hadn't happened yet, why we sometimes responded to questions before they were asked. They chalked it up to dehydration and stress, kept us for observation, and released us with recommendations for psychiatric evaluation. The official report on Dr. Marcus Webb listed him as missing, presumed dead, lost in the desert, like those 3 college students in 2019. I signed that report like I'd signed the previous one, but this time I knew it was a lie. Dr. Webb wasn't missing. He was exactly where he'd chosen to be, existing in all his moments in silence, infinite and eternal. The rental car was towed. His belongings were shipped to his family. The case was closed. And I went back to my job as sheriff of Mineral County, Nevada, pretending that everything was normal, pretending that I was still the same man who'd driven out to investigate a missing person on September 15th, 2024. But I wasn't. I'm not. I exist now in multiple states. I'm sitting in my office writing this account, and I'm also still in silence reading those records. And I'm also standing at the edge of town watching myself leave. And I'm also dying of old age in a hospital bed decades from now. All of it happening simultaneously. All of it eternally present. Crawford quit the department 3 weeks after our return. He moved to Alaska, as far from Nevada as he could get. And I hear he drinks heavily now, trying to dull his perception, trying to force himself back into linear time. It doesn't work. Once you've perceived the web, you can't unperceive it. Martinez stayed on, but requested a transfer to different duties. He works in administration now, never goes out on patrol, never goes anywhere near that part of the county. He performs a small ritual every morning, something his grandfather taught him, something designed to keep him anchored in the present moment. It helps, he says. But I can see the overlap in his eyes sometimes, the multiple moments existing simultaneously behind his careful calm. He feels it too. We all do. I returned to silence 3 months ago. Not physically. I didn't drive out there again. But I realized I didn't need to. Part of me never left. Part of me is always there, existing in all my moments in that town simultaneously. I can access those moments now if I focus, if I let go of the illusion of linear time. And when I do, I see them all the people who transcended, all the souls who chose to exist in eternity rather than sequence. Dr. Webb, standing behind the counter, the woman at the bar, the man at the anvil, the children in the school. Those 3 college students from 2019, their bodies spread across time, filming a documentary that exists in all moments simultaneously. And others, so many others, going back to 1891 and forward into the future. All there, all eternal, all part of the silence. The question I struggled with for months was whether I should warn people away or let them find their own way there. The tribal elders were right to avoid that place. The government was right to try to erase it from records. Some thresholds shouldn't be crossed. Some truths shouldn't be known. Linear time, sequential existence, the illusion that we move from past to present to future, it's a mercy. It allows us to function, to plan, to hope, to grieve. Transcendence, existing in all moments at once, seeing your entire existence as an eternal present. It's beautiful, and it's terrible, and it's not meant for human consciousness. Or maybe it is meant for us. Maybe it's what we're supposed to become. And linear time is the real illusion we're meant to escape. I don't know. I exist in too many moments now to have a simple answer. What I do know is this: silence is still there, about 60 miles southeast of Hawthorne, off what used to be State Route 361. If you go looking for it, you'll probably find it. The cairns mark the way. The silence calls to those who are meant to hear it. And if you do find it, if you do stay, you'll transcend. You'll become infinite. You'll exist in all your moments simultaneously. Death will become meaningless. Birth will become meaningless. Everything will be eternal present. Is that a warning or an invitation? I'm not sure anymore. I exist in moments where I regret going to silence, and I exist in moments where I'm grateful for what I learned there. Both true. Both simultaneous. I still serve as sheriff of Mineral County. I still perform my duties, write my reports, patrol the roads. But I'm also in silence, always in silence, existing in that eternal moment of discovery, of transcendence, of understanding. The cold handprint on my chest that I received in the assay office, that mark that appeared without any hand touching me, it's still there. It hasn't faded. Sometimes it glows faintly in darkness, a sign of my connection to that place, to that moment, to that truth. I can feel it spreading slowly, centimeter by centimeter, year by year. Eventually, it will cover my entire body. Eventually, I'll transcend completely, exist fully in the eternal present, rather than these fragmentary glimpses. I'll become like Dr. Webb, like all the others, infinite and timeless. I'm not afraid of that anymore. How can you fear something that's already happened, already happening, always happening? Time isn't a line. Time is a web. And silence sits at the center of that web, where all the threads converge, where all moments exist simultaneously. The town remembers everything, because the town is everything. Every moment that has ever happened, or will happen in that space, all overlapping, all eternal. The people who lived there didn't leave and they didn't die. They expanded. They spread across time like light through a prism, separated into infinite versions of themselves, all existing, all conscious, all eternal. And anyone who stays long enough, who listens carefully enough to the silence between moments, can join them, can become them, can transcend the illusion of sequential existence and experience the truth of eternal present. If you're watching this and you're planning a trip through Nevada, if you're drawn to abandoned places and forgotten towns, if you think you want to find silence, then understand what you're choosing. You won't die there. You won't disappear. You'll transcend. You'll become infinite. You'll exist in all your moments simultaneously. Every joy you've ever experienced, every sorrow, every triumph, every failure, all at once, forever. Is that heaven or hell? I exist in moments where it's both. I exist in moments where it's neither. I exist in moments where it simply is, beyond judgment, beyond categorization. The silence doesn't judge. It doesn't want anything from you. It simply exists between the moments, waiting for those who are ready to fall through the gaps into eternity. I'm Sheriff Raymond Hatch, and I serve Mineral County, Nevada. I'm also existing in silence, reading records in the assay office, understanding the truth about time. Both are true. Both are happening. Both are eternal. The web of time has caught me, and I'm spreading across it like all the others before me. Soon, I'll exist fully in all my moments, infinite and timeless. And I'll still be here, performing my duties, warning travelers, protecting the living from truths they're not ready to know. Because that's what guardians do. We stand at the threshold between linear time and eternity, between the illusion and the truth. We exist in both worlds simultaneously. We become the bridge. Time isn't a line. Say it with me. Time isn't a line. Time is a web, and we are all caught in it, existing in all our moments simultaneously. The only difference is that most people don't know it yet. They cling to the illusion of sequential existence, moving from past to present to future, believing that each moment ends and the next begins. But I know better now. All moments exist eternally. You're watching this video, and you've already watched it, and you're about to watch it. All true, all simultaneous, all eternal. Welcome to silence. I'm still there. I'm always there. I'll always be there. And if you come looking for me, you'll find me in every moment at once, existing across the web of time, infinite and timeless and eternal. The silence is beautiful once you stop fighting it. Once you let go of the need for sound, for sequence, for the illusion of linear progression. The gaps between moments are where the truth lives. Listen carefully. Listen to the silence. Really listen, and you'll hear it too. The web of time, humming with all moments simultaneously. You're already caught in it. You've always been caught in it. You just haven't realized it yet. But you will. In some moment, in some version of yourself spread across the web, you already have. Time isn't a line. Time isn't a line. Time isn't a line.